He spent 34 years on the bench, exposed liars for a living, read body language like a book, assessed credibility under oath, and made decisions that sent people to prison. Retired at 63, met a woman at a fundraiser 6 months later. Charming, warm, attentive in a way nobody had been since his wife died. 18 months later, she had his power of attorney, controlled his medication schedule, and his 3 adult children hadn't been allowed past the front door in 4 months. A retired federal judge, a man whose entire career was seeing through deception. So here's the question that should terrify you. If a man who spent 3 decades detecting lies couldn't see this, what makes you think your brain can? She wants your retirement at 60, and your brain helps her get it. Not because you're stupid, not because you're weak, because your brain at 60 is running neurochemistry that was designed to keep you alive in a tribe. And she's hijacking that software with surgical precision. This isn't a repeat of the red flags video. You already know the warning signs. This is the advanced neuroscience of why you can't act on them. And more importantly, how to rewire the circuitry so you finally can. Let me tell you something neuroscientists have known for decades, but nobody in the dating advice space is talking about. Your brain at 60 is not the same organ it was at 40. I don't mean you're less intelligent. I mean the chemistry has shifted. After age 50, your brain loses roughly 10% of its dopamine receptors every decade. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter that handles reward, motivation, and pleasure. The thing that makes you feel alive when something good happens. At 30, a compliment from a stranger gives you a small hit. Nice. You move on. At 65, after 15 years of declining dopamine, that same compliment lands like a freight train. Your reward system is starving. And when a woman gives you sustained attention, not a compliment, sustained, focused, deliberate attention, your depleted brain doesn't process it normally. Processes it like a man dying of thirst, being handed a glass of water. The American Brain Foundation published research showing that aging brains produce significantly less dopamine and serotonin. Your emotional thermostat is recalibrated. Things that felt normal at 40 feel extraordinary at 65. And things that should feel suspicious feel like a miracle. Psychologists call this dopamine depletion amplification. The less dopamine your brain produces baseline, the more intensely it responds to any external source of reward. You're not being naive. Your neurochemistry is being exploited. And the woman sitting across the table? She doesn't need to understand any of this science. She just needs to keep smiling. Your brain does the rest. There's a term in clinical psychology that most people associate with narcissists and cult leaders. It's called love bombing. Love bombing is not just moving fast. It's a specific grooming pattern, documented in peer-reviewed coercive control research since the 1970s, where a person overwhelms their target with affection, praise, constant communication, and manufactured emotional intensity before any real intimacy has been earned. Here's what makes it dangerous for men over 60. When you're young, love bombing triggers skepticism. Why is this person so into me? We just met. Your prefrontal cortex, the brain's skepticism engine, fires a warning. But at 60, with depleted dopamine and years of emotional starvation, love bombing doesn't trigger skepticism. It triggers relief. Your brain doesn't say this is too fast. It says finally. And here's the part that makes this worse. Most women who love bomb older men don't think they're running a clinical manipulation tactic. In their mind, they're just being enthusiastic. They're showing you how much they care. The grooming is instinctive, not premeditated, which makes it invisible to both of you. Psychologists at the National Council on Aging documented that love bombing is the single most effective initial tactic in sweetheart scams targeting seniors. Not because it's sophisticated, because it's perfectly calibrated to exploit a dopamine-depleted brain that hasn't been seen in years. She texts you good morning every day. She calls just to hear your voice. She remembers what you said 3 weeks ago and brings it up. She tells you you're different from every man she's ever known. And your brain, your aging, dopamine-starving, reward-hypersensitive brain, codes all of that as evidence of love. is not evidence. It's phase 1. You know what makes slot machines the most addictive gambling device ever invented? It's not the wins. It's the inconsistency of the wins. If a slot machine paid out every time, you'd get bored. If it never paid out, you'd walk away. But because it pays out sometimes, randomly, unpredictably, your brain enters a state psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. And once that loop activates, your dopamine system locks in harder than it does with consistent rewards. Now apply that to a relationship. After the love bombing phase, something shifts. She's still sweet, but not always. Some days she's distant. Some days she's cold. Then she's back. Warm, affectionate, present. Then gone again. You start working harder. You start trying to figure out what you did wrong. You start performing, being funnier, more generous, more accommodating, because you need the warmth to come back. That feeling in your chest, when she finally smiles at you again. After 3 days of silence, that's not love. That's a dopamine spike from intermittent reinforcement. The exact same neurological mechanism as a gambling addiction. Clinical researchers call the result a trauma bond. An emotional attachment formed, not despite the inconsistency but because of it. Cleveland Clinic research describes it as a cycle, where the brain creates a false sense of safety during reconciliation phases, trapping the victim in an addictive loop of tension and relief. And here's what nobody tells men over 60. Your brain is more susceptible to intermittent reinforcement than a younger brain, because dopamine depletion makes every reward spike proportionally larger. The highs are higher, the lows are lower, and the addiction forms faster. One guy described it to me. I knew something was wrong. I could see it. But every time she came back warm, my brain just reset, like it erased the bad data. That's not weakness. That's neurobiology. And she doesn't need a psychology degree to operate it. She just needs to be unpredictable. This is the tactic that nobody in the YouTube advice space talks about. And it's the most effective one of all. She starts helping you, not with money, with life. She organizes your medication. She schedules your doctor's appointments. She sorts your mail. She handles the grocery shopping. She reminds you when your insurance is due. She takes over the parts of daily living that, let's be honest, you've been struggling with alone. And at first, it's a goddamn gift. For a man who's been managing everything solo since his wife passed, having someone handle the details feels like partnership, like care, like love. But here's the clinical reality. Every task she takes over is a dependency she creates. And over time, 6 months, a year, she becomes the person you can't function without. Who knows when your prescriptions run out? She does. Who has the login to your Medicare portal? She does. Who tracks which bills are on autopay? She does. Who manages the calendar so your kids know when to visit? She does. And then one day, she decides your daughter's visits are too stressful for your blood pressure. And because she controls the calendar, the visits stop. She decides your old financial advisor doesn't understand your new situation. And because she books the appointments, the advisor gets replaced with someone she chose. Psychologists studying elder abuse call this instrumental dependency creation, the systematic takeover of functional tasks that positions the caretaker as the sole gatekeeper of the victim's daily life. It's documented in every major coercive control study, and it doesn't look like abuse. It looks like love. The Hourglass Foundation, the UK's leading elder abuse organization, found that people over 60 are 68% less likely to attempt to leave a controlling partner than younger people. Not because they're more passive, because the dependency is deeper. She's not just a partner. She's your operating system. Leaving her means losing access to your own life. Here's a psychology fact that should make every man over 60 sit up straight. Your biggest fear at this age isn't losing money. It's losing your mind. And she knows that. Financial gaslighting is when someone manipulates your perception of your own financial decisions. And in relationships with older men, it weaponizes the one thing you're already anxious about, your memory. We talked about this, honey. You said it was fine to move money into the joint account. Don't you remember? You told me to call the insurance company. You signed that last month. I even reminded you about it twice. Did you? Maybe. Maybe not. But here's the thing, because you're 65. And you know your memory isn't what it was at 40. You give her the benefit of the doubt. Every time. Because the alternative, admitting you can't remember, feels like admitting cognitive decline. The Australian Psychology Society published research showing that gaslighting in elderly relationships specifically exploits age-related memory concerns. Over 60% of elder abuse victims experience financial abuse alongside psychological manipulation. The gaslighter doesn't need to forge documents. She just needs to say you already agreed. Enough times until you stop trusting your own recall. And this is where it connects to the neuroscience. Your hippocampus, the brain's memory encoding center, does shrink with age. Not catastrophically for most people, but enough that you notice. You forget where you put the keys. You blank on a name. Normal aging. But she takes that normal aging and turns it into a weapon. Every don't you remember isn't a question. It's a redefinition of your financial reality. And once you stop trusting your own memory about money, she becomes the only source of truth about where your money is and what you agreed to do with it. One man's daughter described finding $47,000 in transfers that her father had no memory of authorizing. He defended his partner. I must have forgotten. He hadn't. She'd done it while he napped and told him he'd agreed to it the previous week. That's not forgetfulness. That's financial gaslighting. And it works best on the people who are most afraid of losing their memory. In 2024, the FBI reported approximately 59,000 individuals fell victim to romance scams, losing over $672 million. ARP estimates $20.5 billion in elder financial abuse goes unreported annually. And researchers found that nearly 1 in 10 adults over 50 has experienced an online approach that led to a money request. But here's what those stats don't tell you. The successful predators. The ones who never show up in FBI reports. Because they operate in person. Not through Nigerian email accounts. They do their homework. Your property tax records are public. In most counties, anyone can search your name and see what you own, what you paid, and what it's worth today. Your wife's obituary, the one your kids posted to honor her, listed your full name, your church, your neighborhood, and the fact that you'd been married for 40 years. That's a profile. That's targeting data. Your Facebook posts from Thanksgiving show the paid-off house, the new truck, the family gathered around a table. That screams financial stability. Fox News security analysts describe how retirees' digital footprints, built over decades of public records, social media posts, and property filings, create detailed profiles that predators can access. With a 5-minute Google search, she didn't happen to show up at your church, or that fundraiser, or that dating site. She showed up because you checked every box on a spreadsheet she built before you ever exchanged a word. And here's the dark psychology. Because she already knows your net worth. She never has to ask about money directly. She already knows you own the house outright. She already knows about the pension. So when she says, I don't care about money, she's not lying. She doesn't need to care. She already has the data. That's not dating. That's due diligence. And you're the asset under review. If you're over 60 and entering a second marriage or serious partnership, there's a financial battlefield that nobody prepares you for. The blended family. She has kids. You have kids. And the guilt dynamics between those two groups become the most powerful asset redirection tool in her arsenal. It starts subtle. My daughter needs help with her rent this month. Fine. You're generous. You can afford it. Then, it's not fair that your kids get everything, and mine get nothing. She's not wrong on the surface. You start feeling guilty. You start thinking about fairness. Then, if you really love me, you treat my children like your own. Aren't we a family? And now your estate plan, the one you spent decades building for your biological children, starts getting rewritten. through the lens of manufactured family obligation. Estate attorneys specializing in blended families report that beneficiary designation changes are the single most common form of asset redirection. In second marriages, your IRA, your life insurance, your 401k, these accounts transfer to named beneficiaries outside of probate, which means your will doesn't matter if the beneficiary has been quietly changed. To her or her children, Fidelity Investments published guidance, specifically warning remarried couples to audit every beneficiary designation, because out-of-date designations are a common and costly mistake. But in many cases, the designations aren't out of date. They've been strategically updated. The Aspen Wealth Management Group documented cases where spouses in second marriages systematically changed beneficiaries on retirement accounts, life insurance policies, and annuities, while the original partner believed the old designations were still in place. Your kids aren't paranoid. They're watching their inheritance get redistributed in real time through a guilt machine they can't compete with, because challenging her means challenging you. And you're in love. A power of attorney is the most powerful legal document in American life short of a court order. It gives one person the legal right to make financial and medical decisions for another. And she's going to ask for it. Not aggressively, not obviously. She's going to frame it as care. What if something happens to you? Someone needs to be able to talk to the doctors. Your kids live 3 states away. I'm the one who's here. It's just a precaution. It doesn't change anything. Elder law attorneys at Smith Strong report that power of attorney abuse is one of the fastest growing forms of elder exploitation. And in 1/3 of all cases, the perpetrator is someone close to the victim. Here's what a POA actually gives her. Financial POA, access to all bank accounts, authority to sell property, power to move investments, ability to change beneficiaries on accounts that allow agent-directed changes, all without your signature or your knowledge. Healthcare proxy, the right to make medical decisions when you can't speak for yourself, including which doctors you see, which treatments you receive, and whether your children are classified as authorized contacts with access to your medical information. A New York estate litigation case documented how a partner used healthcare proxy authority to restrict family visits by claiming they were detrimental to the patient's recovery. The adult children were legally locked out of their father's hospital room by a woman he'd been dating for 14 months. And here's the connection to the caretaker trap. She spent months building dependency, managing your meds, scheduling your appointments, tracking your insurance. By the time she asks for POA, it seems logical. She already does everything. Why not make it official? Because official means legal. And legal means your children need a court order to override her. By then, it's a lawyer fight, and she's spending your money to defend the position she holds over your life. Harrison Estate Law published findings that POA abuse is hardest to detect in progress. Sudden changes to the estate plan, unexplained depletion of bank accounts, real estate transfers shortly before death, or missing valuables. But by the time these patterns are visible, the damage is done. So here's the real question. You've heard all of this. You can see the pattern. So why can't you act on it? This is the chapter that changes everything. You've now heard 9 tactics, 9 plays, 9 ways she can dismantle your financial life while looking like the best thing that ever happened to you. And if you're honest, if you're really honest, at least 2 of them sound familiar. Not because you read about them, because you felt them. So why didn't you act? Researchers at the University of Michigan published a landmark study using something called betrayal trauma theory. Here's the core finding. When a person depends on someone for emotional or practical survival, the brain actively suppresses awareness of that person's betrayal. Read that again. Your brain doesn't just fail to notice the exploitation. It hides it from you on purpose. The evolutionary logic is simple. If you're dependent on someone for food, shelter, companionship, or care, and you detect they're exploiting you, Acting on that detection means losing the thing you depend on. And for a 65-year-old man who's been alone for years, and now has someone managing his medication, cooking his meals, and making him feel alive, the cost of seeing the truth is losing everything that makes his life livable. So the brain runs a calculation you never see. It weighs the evidence of exploitation against the cost of acknowledging it. And when the dependency is deep enough, when she's your operating system, your daily routine, your only source of sustained human warmth, the brain buries the evidence. You see the bank statements and your brain says, "There's probably an explanation." You notice money missing and your brain says, "I probably forgot." Your daughter says something's wrong, and your brain says she's jealous. That's not denial. It's betrayal blindness, an active neurological process that sacrifices financial truth to preserve emotional survival. And now you understand why the retired judge couldn't see it. His brain, one of the sharpest legal minds in his state, chose not to, because seeing it meant losing the only person who made his life feel worth living after his wife died. All right, deep breath. Here's how you break out. I just spent 12 minutes showing you how your own brain conspires against you. That was necessary. You needed the full picture. But I didn't make this video to scare you into a bunker. I made it to give you the tools to rewire the vulnerability at the neurological level. Not just be careful. Actually change how your brain processes attachment, reward, and trust. Here are 5 brain-based tools. And I'm being specific because vague advice is worthless advice. Rewire 1. Dopamine diversification. Your brain is exploitable because she's your only source of dopamine. When one person is the sole provider of reward, attachment, and pleasure, your brain will protect that source at all costs. That's the dependency. The fix is structural. You need multiple independent dopamine sources that have nothing to do with romance. A weekly poker game, a woodworking class, a fishing buddy, a volunteer role at the VA, a gym routine. Neuroplasticity research shows that consistent social engagement across multiple contexts, not one intense relationship, normalizes dopamine sensitivity within 8 to 12 weeks. Your brain stops treating her attention as extraordinary because attention is coming from multiple directions. The rule: before committing to any relationship, build at least 3 independent social routines that give you connection, purpose, and reward. If she disappears tomorrow, your life should still feel livable. That's not emotional distance. That's neurological insurance. Rewire 2. The 72-hour decision buffer. Every tactic I described in this video relies on one thing: speed. Love bombing is fast. Financial gaslighting is disorienting. The caretaker trap builds before you notice. The antidote is forced delay. The rule: any financial decision, legal document, or life change involving her gets a mandatory 72-hour waiting period. No exceptions. No, but we talked about this. No, it's time sensitive. Why 72 hours? Because neuroscience research on decision-making in older adults shows that the prefrontal cortex, your risk assessment engine, requires time to override emotional hijacking from the limbic system. In older brains, this override is slower. Not worse, slower. The hardware works fine. It just needs more processing time. A woman who loves you will wait 72 hours. A woman working an angle can't afford to. Rewire 3. The external memory system. Financial gaslighting only works if your memory is the only record. The rule: start documenting every financial conversation, agreement, and decision in a notebook, a notes app, or an email to yourself. Date it. Details: April 15th. Discussed moving $5,000 to joint account. I said no. She said she'd bring it up later. When she says you already agreed to this, you open the notebook, and reality doesn't get rewritten. This isn't paranoia. This is what corporate executives have done for decades. They keep records because they know human memory is unreliable. You're running a retirement worth more than most small businesses. Treat it like one. Rewire 4. the dependency audit. Every 3 months, sit down and list every daily task she handles for you. Medications, appointments, bills, calendar, groceries, communication with family. If the list is longer than 5 items, you have a dependency problem, not a relationship. A dependency. The rule: for every task she handles, maintain the ability to do it yourself. Keep your own login to Medicare. Know your own prescription schedule. Have your own calendar. Call your own kids. The caretaker trap works because the handoff is gradual. The audit catches it before the dependency becomes total. Rewire 5. Cognitive diffusion. Separating feelings from facts. This is the hardest one, and it's the one that actually rewires betrayal blindness. Cognitive diffusion is a technique from acceptance and commitment therapy. Here's how it works. When you have a thought like, "She would never do that," or "There's probably an explanation," you don't argue with the thought. You label it. "I'm having the thought that she would never do that." That one sentence, "I'm having the thought that," creates neurological distance between you and the belief. It activates the prefrontal cortex and deactivates the limbic defense that betrayal blindness runs on. Practice it with small things first. "I'm having the thought that I don't need to check the bank statement. I'm having the thought that my daughter is overreacting." Over time, this builds a neural pathway that lets you see the evidence your brain is trying to hide, without the emotional collapse that betrayal blindness was designed to prevent. You can know the truth and survive it. You just need the circuitry to handle both at the same time. Let me tell you how the judge's story ends. His daughter, the one who'd been locked out, didn't give up. She filed for a court review of the POA. Took 8 months and cost her $40,000 in legal fees. But a forensic accountant found $180,000 in unauthorized transfers. The POA was revoked. The partner was removed. The judge lived another 6 years. He rebuilt his social life. Poker games, a book club at the library, volunteering at a legal clinic for veterans. He told his daughter, "My brain wasn't broken. It was just starving. I fed it from one source when I needed 10. That's the rewire. Not bitterness. Not isolation. Not giving up on connection. Diversification. Delay. Documentation. Auditing dependency. And learning to see your own thoughts as thoughts, not as truth." She wants your retirement at 60, and your brain helps her. That part is biology. You can't change it, but you can change the architecture around it. You can build a life where no single person has the power to rewire your reality, where your dopamine comes from a dozen sources instead of one, where your memory lives in a notebook as well as your head, where your children have a seat at the table that nobody can take away. You're not protecting yourself from love. You're protecting your ability to choose love, with your eyes open and your prefrontal cortex online. One of you watching this right now knows exactly what I'm talking about. You've felt the slot machine in your chest. You've heard you already agreed to this and questioned your own mind. You've watched someone take over your daily life and called it partnership. Tell me about it in the comments. Which tactic hit closest to home? Your story might be the one that saves someone else's retirement. And if you know a man who needs to hear this, send it to him today, not tomorrow. Stay sharp, stay wired right, and stay free.